They saw her hunched over a stack of vendor invoices, fingers moving methodically across the keyboard as she entered purchase order numbers into spreadsheet cells. The new girl from IT support, relegated to the most mundane tasks while the real technicians handled the important work. What they didn't see was the way her eyes occasionally flicked to the network monitoring displays across the room, or how her typing paused for just a fraction of a second whenever certain system alerts chimed.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But when the chief security officer walked past her cubicle and caught a glimpse of what was actually on her screen, his coffee mug slipped from his fingers and shattered against the polished concrete floor. Because buried beneath those boring spreadsheets were command line interfaces that shouldn't have been accessible to someone with basic user privileges, interfaces that most of his senior staff didn't even know existed. The fluorescent lights hummed with that particular frequency that seemed designed to drain enthusiasm from anyone unfortunate enough to spend their day beneath them. Meridian Cybersecurity Solutions occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, the kind of building where every surface reflected either artificial light or the perpetual gray of Pacific Northwest clouds. On the second floor, the IT department sprawled across an open workspace filled with standing desks, multiple monitors, and the constant background noise of mechanical keyboards clicking like distant rain. The air carried that distinctive blend of coffee that had been reheated too many times and the ozone smell that came from dozens of computer fans working overtime. Sarah Chen sat at workstation 47B, positioned in what the office layout probably called a collaborative space, but what everyone understood was the section reserved for junior staff, temporary employees, and people whose responsibilities didn't require proximity to anything important. Her desk faced away from the server room, away from the incident response center, away from the windows that offered glimpses of Elliott Bay in the distance. The stack of papers beside her keyboard rose nearly 8 inches high. Vendor contracts awaiting digital filing, hardware receipts that needed categorization, maintenance agreements requiring data entry into the company's procurement system. The kind of clerical work that someone with a computer science degree from MIT might find intellectually unstimulating, but Sarah approached each invoice with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced efficiency, entering vendor information, cross-referencing purchase order numbers, updating inventory databases. To anyone watching from across the room, she looked exactly like what her employment paperwork said she was, a temporary administrative assistant hired to help the IT department catch up on their backlog of mundane tasks. But occasionally, when she thought no one was paying attention, Sarah's screen would flicker to something else entirely. Command prompts that appeared and disappeared too quickly for casual observation. Network diagnostic tools that definitely weren't part of the standard Office software suite. Terminal windows that showed cascading strings of data in green text against black backgrounds, the kind of thing that most people associated with movies about hackers. The morning progressed with the rhythm of the corporate routine. People drifted between workstations, shared coffee maker gossip, attended meetings in conference rooms with names like Innovation Station and Synergy Central. The background soundtrack consisted of phone conversations about server patches, discussions of firewall configurations, and the occasional frustrated curse when someone's code refused to compile properly. Sarah kept her head down and focused on the paperwork. Purchase order 47829 for replacement network switches, maintenance contract renewal for the backup power systems, software licensing agreement for the new intrusion detection platform. Each document received the same careful attention, the same precise data entry, the same professional thoroughness that suggested she took even the most routine tasks seriously. Around 10:30, Marcus Webb from Network Operations stopped by her desk. Marcus was the kind of guy who wore his expertise like a badge, constantly referencing technical specifications and industry best practices in casual conversation. He had 3 certifications mounted in plastic frames above his workstation and a tendency to explain things to people who hadn't asked for explanations. "How's the filing going?" he asked, glancing at the stack of papers with the expression of someone observing a particularly tedious form of punishment. "Getting familiar with our vendor ecosystem?" Sarah looked up from her keyboard, her expression politely neutral. "Learning a lot about infrastructure investments. Interesting to see how the budget allocations break down across different security domains." Marcus nodded with the kind of patronizing enthusiasm reserved for people who were trying to find something encouraging to say about mind-numbing work. "Yeah, it's all connected. Everything we do here builds on everything else. That's the beauty of cybersecurity. It's holistic." He gestured toward the server room with proprietary pride. "We've got some pretty sophisticated systems running back there. Military-grade encryption, multi-layered authentication protocols, intrusion detection that can spot anomalies in microseconds. It takes years to really understand how it all fits together." "I imagine it does," Sarah agreed, turning back to her screen where a vendor invoice for cryptographic hardware waited for processing. "Complex systems usually are."
Marcus lingered for another moment, clearly hoping to elaborate on the complexity of the systems he helped maintain, but Sarah's attention had already returned to her paperwork. He eventually drifted back toward his own workstation, leaving her alone with the invoices and purchase orders. What Marcus couldn't see from his angle was that Sarah's screen now showed 2 windows. The vendor invoice processing system occupied most of the display, but a smaller terminal window had appeared in the corner. Lines of code scrolled past too quickly for casual reading, punctuated by status messages that appeared and vanished before anyone walking by could focus on them. The morning's second interruption came from Jessica Martinez, one of the senior security analysts who occupied a workstation near the windows. Jessica had been with Meridian for 4 years and carried herself with a confidence that came from surviving multiple crisis situations, late-night incident responses, and the kind of high-stress troubleshooting that separated competent technicians from excellent ones. "Sarah, right?" Jessica said, appearing beside the desk with a coffee mug that bore the logo of a cybersecurity conference from 2 years ago. "How are you settling in?" "Good, thanks. Still getting oriented, but everyone's been helpful." Jessica glanced at the paperwork with sympathy. "Filing duty, huh? We all started somewhere. When I first got here, they had me testing backup procedures for 6 months. Not exactly glamorous, but you learn the systems from the ground up." "There's value in understanding the infrastructure," Sarah agreed. "Amazing how much you can learn about an organization's priorities from their purchasing patterns." "Absolutely. Our budgets tell the whole story. What we're worried about, what we're investing in, where we think the threats are coming from." Jessica sipped her coffee and studied Sarah with the kind of casual assessment that security professionals developed over time. "You have a tech background?" "Some experience, nothing too specialized." It was a careful answer, neither claiming expertise nor admitting to complete ignorance, the kind of response that revealed nothing while seeming to be cooperative. Jessica nodded and moved on, but Sarah noticed the way she glanced back once from her own workstation, as if trying to place something that didn't quite fit. The third interruption was different. Around 11:15, Sarah's screen flickered to display a system alert that definitely wasn't related to vendor invoices. A red warning box appeared in the center of her monitor, filled with text that made her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Network intrusion detected. Unauthorized access attempt. Security protocol breach in progress. Immediate response required." The alert disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the familiar spreadsheet of purchase order data. But for someone who knew what to look for, the brief flicker of Sarah's expression revealed recognition, understanding, and something that might have been concerning. She continued typing, entering vendor information with the same steady rhythm as before, but her eyes now moved occasionally toward the network monitoring station across the room, where 3 large displays showed real-time security data, traffic patterns, connection logs, threat detection algorithms processing thousands of data points per second. The monitor showed normal activity, green status indicators, steady data flows, all systems operating within acceptable parameters.
But Sarah's screen continued to flicker occasionally with those brief glimpses of command line interfaces, diagnostic tools, and system analysis windows that suggested someone was looking much deeper into the network infrastructure than their official job description would seem to require. At 11:30, the routine was interrupted by the arrival of Robert Chang, Meridian's chief security officer. Chang was a serious man who wore expensive suits and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in most rooms. He'd built his reputation through a combination of technical expertise and strategic thinking that had helped Meridian land several high-profile government contracts. Chang moved through the IT department with purpose, stopping at various workstations to check on ongoing projects, review incident reports, and ensure that his staff was maintaining the security posture the clients paid premium rates to expect. His presence changed the atmosphere subtly, conversations becoming more focused, postures straightening, everyone demonstrating that they were earning their salaries. He paused at Marcus Webb's station to review some firewall configurations, spent several minutes discussing threat intelligence with Jessica Martinez, and made notes on a tablet as he surveyed the various monitoring displays that showed the company's security infrastructure in real time. Sarah kept her attention focused on the paperwork, but she was aware of Chang's progress through the department. When he stopped at the workstation next to hers to examine some security logs, she could feel his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. That's when her screen chose to display another brief flicker of those unauthorized interfaces. Command prompts, network analysis tools, system diagnostics that definitely weren't part of the standard administrative software package. The flicker lasted perhaps 2 seconds before returning to the vendor invoice processing system.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But 2 seconds was long enough for someone with Chang's experience to notice that something wasn't quite right. His conversation with the adjacent workstation's occupant continued, but Sarah could sense his attention shifting, his peripheral awareness focusing on her monitor. She continued typing, maintaining the same rhythm, the same professional focus on the mundane tasks that comprised her official responsibilities. But the terminal windows continued to appear and disappear in brief glimpses, revealing activity that suggested someone was conducting a much more sophisticated analysis of Meridian's network infrastructure than anyone had authorized. When Chang finally moved away, continuing his tour of the department, Sarah allowed herself a moment to consider the implications. Her screen showed nothing but vendor invoices and purchase order spreadsheets, the kind of boring administrative work that most technical professionals would consider beneath their expertise. But buried beneath those spreadsheets, accessible through interfaces that most of Meridian's senior staff didn't know existed, someone was conducting a systematic analysis of the company's most sensitive security systems. Someone who understood network architecture, cryptographic protocols, and intrusion detection methodologies well enough to navigate restricted areas of the infrastructure without triggering automated alerts. The morning progressed toward lunch hour with Sarah maintaining her focus on the clerical tasks, while occasionally glimpsing those deeper system interfaces that revealed a much more comprehensive understanding of Meridian's technical capabilities than her position would seem to require. Around her, the IT department continued its daily routine of maintaining, monitoring, and protecting the digital infrastructure that kept the company operational. Phone calls about server maintenance, discussions of software updates, meetings about security protocols and incident response procedures. None of them realized that the quiet woman at workstation 47B, methodically processing vendor invoices with steady professional competence, was simultaneously conducting an analysis of their network security that would have impressed most of the senior staff if they'd known it was happening. The stack of paperwork beside her keyboard continued to shrink as Sarah worked through vendor contracts and maintenance agreements with the same careful attention she brought to everything else. But anyone watching closely might have noticed that her typing occasionally paused, her eyes moving toward the network monitoring displays, as if she were correlating the mundane administrative data with something much more significant happening beneath the surface of Meridian's digital infrastructure. The lunch crowd had thinned when Sarah finally pushed back from her workstation, leaving behind a significantly smaller stack of processed documents.
The fluorescent lighting seemed harsher in the afternoon, casting everything in that particular shade of corporate beige that made even the most vibrant personalities appear slightly washed out. She walked toward the break room with the same unhurried pace she brought to everything else, passing workstations where colleagues hunched over keyboards, analyzing threat reports and fine-tuning security protocols. The conversations she overheard were technical, focused, the kind of shop talk that revealed both competence and the underlying stress that came with protecting digital assets worth millions of dollars. The new signature definitions are causing false positives. We're getting alerts every time someone accesses the shared drives through the VPN. Another voice carried across the open workspace. Client wants to know if we can detect zero-day exploits in real time. I told them we're good, but we're not psychic. Sarah poured herself coffee from the machine that had probably been brewing the same pot since morning, added cream that had seen better days, and settled into one of the break room chairs with its view of the parking garage. Through the windows, Seattle's perpetual drizzle created patterns on the glass that shifted and reformed like living things.
At 2:45, the routine was disrupted by Robert Chang's return to the IT department. This time, his presence carried different energy, more focused, more urgent than his morning tour. He moved directly to the network monitoring station, where 3 senior analysts were gathered around the displays that showed real-time security data. Their conversation was too quiet for Sarah to hear from her desk, but their body language suggested they were discussing something more serious than routine maintenance. Chang pointed at specific sections of the displays, asked questions that prompted hurried typing and screen changes, reviewed data patterns with the kind of intensity that indicated he was looking for something specific. Marcus Webb joined the group, carrying a tablet loaded with diagnostic information. The discussion became more animated, with people gesturing toward different monitoring displays and referencing log files that appeared on various screens. Chang's expression grew increasingly serious as he reviewed whatever data they were showing him. Sarah maintained her focus on the vendor documentation, but her peripheral awareness tracked the developing situation at the monitoring station. The group's discussion continued for nearly 20 minutes, punctuated by phone calls to other departments and requests for additional data analysis. When Chang finally stepped away from the monitoring station, his movement through the department had changed. Where his morning tour had been routine and systematic, now he moved with purpose, stopping at specific workstations to ask targeted questions, reviewing particular systems with focused attention. He paused at workstations near Sarah's position, examining user logs and access permissions with the kind of scrutiny that suggested he was looking for something specific. His questions were precise, technical, focused on identifying unauthorized system access or unusual network behavior. Sarah's screen remained steady, but her continued brief flickers of unauthorized activity, system interfaces that revealed comprehensive analysis of network architecture, security protocols, and infrastructure vulnerabilities, revealed activity far beyond what her administrative role should have permitted. The timing was becoming increasingly precarious. Chang's investigation was clearly focused on identifying the source of the anomalous network traffic that Marcus had mentioned during lunch, and that investigation was bringing him progressively closer to Workstation 47B, where Sarah continued processing mundane paperwork while simultaneously accessing systems that most senior staff members couldn't reach. At 3:20, Chang's investigation took a more direct turn. He approached Sarah's desk area, reviewing the workstations in her section with systematic attention. He examined user logs, checked system access permissions, and asked questions about recent account activity that suggested he was narrowing his search parameters. Sarah continued her data entry, maintaining the same rhythm and professional focus she'd displayed all day. But now her screen flickered more frequently with those brief glimpses of unauthorized activity,
system interfaces that revealed comprehensive analysis of network architecture, security protocols, and infrastructure vulnerabilities. When Chang reached the workstation directly adjacent to hers, Sarah could hear his conversation with the IT technician who occupied that position. Questions about unusual system queries, anomalous traffic patterns, and user accounts that were accessing network segments beyond their authorized scope. The investigation was systematic, thorough, and getting progressively closer to identifying the source of activity that had been puzzling Meridian's security team throughout the day. Chang's approach suggested someone with extensive experience in digital forensics, someone who understood how to trace unauthorized network access through layers of system logs and activity patterns. Sarah's screen continued to flicker between the vendor invoice processing system and those brief glimpses of command line interfaces that revealed much more sophisticated system interaction than her official role would suggest. The activity was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal, as Chang's investigation focused on the exact type of network behavior that her unauthorized access was generating. The afternoon was building toward a confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable, as Chang's systematic investigation converged on the workstation where Sarah continued processing mundane paperwork while simultaneously demonstrating technical capabilities that far exceeded what anyone in the department had reason to expect from a temporary administrative assistant. Her typing remained steady, her expression professionally neutral, but the weight of scrutiny was intensifying as Chang's forensic analysis moved closer to identifying the source of the sophisticated network reconnaissance that had been puzzling Meridian's security team since morning. The afternoon light filtering through Seattle's cloud cover had taken on that particular quality that marked the transition from productive work hours to the more contemplative end-of-day period. Across Meridian's IT department, the atmosphere had shifted from routine operations to something more focused and deliberate, as Chang's investigation continued to narrow its scope. Sarah finished processing another batch of hardware maintenance contracts, her fingers moving across the keyboard with mechanical precision, while her peripheral awareness tracked the increasingly systematic examination of workstations around her. Chang had moved through the department like a methodical predator, eliminating possibilities and focusing his attention on the remaining areas where unauthorized network access could have originated.
Sarah sipped her coffee, expression unchanged. Anomalous how? System queries that are perfectly legitimate individually, but when you look at the sequence, it's like someone's conducting a really sophisticated reconnaissance, like they're mapping our architecture piece by piece, but doing it so carefully that none of the automated alerts are triggering. Could be routine maintenance. That's what we thought initially, but the queries are coming from user accounts that shouldn't have access to some of those system areas. Low-level accounts that are somehow reaching into network segments they shouldn't even be able to see. Marcus finished his sandwich and crumpled the wrapper with the kind of frustrated energy that suggested this anomalous traffic was becoming a bigger headache than he'd initially expected. Chang wants us to run a comprehensive audit this afternoon. Full network sweep, access log analysis, the whole 9 yards. Sounds thorough. Yeah, well, that's Chang for you. He doesn't believe in coincidences when it comes to network security. His philosophy is that if something looks strange, it probably is strange, and if it is strange, we need to understand why before it becomes a serious problem. Sarah nodded with appropriate understanding, the kind of response that acknowledged the wisdom of paranoia in cybersecurity without revealing any particular expertise in the subject. But when Marcus left the break room, heading back toward his workstation and the afternoon's diagnostic challenges, she remained in her chair for several more minutes, staring out at the parking garage with an expression that suggested she was processing more than just casual conversation. The afternoon shift brought new energy to the IT department. Fresh coffee appeared, abandoned lunch containers disappeared, and the general atmosphere shifted from morning routine to the more focused intensity that characterized the serious work hours. Sarah returned to her desk to find that someone had added new paperwork to her stack. Hardware warranty documentation, software licensing agreements, vendor performance reports that needed digital filing and database updates.
She settled into her chair and resumed the methodical data entry that had occupied her morning, but now there was a subtle difference in her approach. Her typing remained steady and professional, but her eyes moved more frequently toward the network monitoring displays across the room. The screens showed the same patterns of normal activity, but occasionally one of the displays would flicker with alerts that appeared and disappeared too quickly for casual observation. At 2:15, Jessica Martinez appeared beside her desk with an expression that mixed curiosity with something that might have been concern. "Sarah, can I ask you something? And please don't take this the wrong way, but what exactly is your background? I mean, before you started here." It was the kind of question that sounded casual but carried undertones that suggested Jessica had been thinking about this conversation for a while. Sarah looked up from her keyboard, maintaining the same politely professional demeanor she'd shown all day. "Various things, some technical work, some administrative positions, nothing too specialized. It's just that some of the comments you made earlier about infrastructure analysis and spending patterns, those aren't the kind of observations you hear from people doing filing work. They're the kind of insights that come from experience with security management, maybe some background in system architecture or risk assessment." I pick things up quickly. The vendor documentation is pretty educational if you pay attention to the details. Right. Well, if you ever want to learn more about what we do here, beyond the administrative side, I'd be happy to show you some of the monitoring tools we use. The real-time threat detection stuff is pretty impressive. That's kind of you. Maybe once I get caught up on the paperwork backlog. It was a polite deflection that committed to nothing while seeming grateful for the offer. Jessica lingered for another moment, studying Sarah with the kind of professional assessment that security analysts developed over time, the ability to sense when something didn't quite fit the expected pattern. "Sure, no problem. Just let me know if you're interested." After Jessica returned to her workstation, Sarah continued her data entry with the same steady focus, but now she was aware of being observed. Not obviously, not intrusively, but with the kind of peripheral attention that suggested people were starting to notice inconsistencies between her official role and the insights she occasionally revealed. Her screen continued to flicker with those brief glimpses of unauthorized interfaces, command prompts that appeared and vanished before anyone walking by could focus on them. But now the activity seemed more purposeful, more systematic, as if someone were conducting an increasingly sophisticated analysis of Meridian's network infrastructure while maintaining the appearance of routine clerical work.
The breakthrough came at 3:47 when Chang's review of system logs revealed a pattern that hadn't been apparent in the individual data points. Someone with administrative-level access credentials had been conducting what could only be described as a comprehensive security audit of Meridian's entire network infrastructure, but doing it so skillfully that the automated monitoring systems had interpreted each query as legitimate routine maintenance. "Pull up the access logs for workstations 45 through 50, Chang instructed the senior analyst who'd been assisting his investigation. "I want to see every system query, every database access, every network probe that originated from this section in the last 8 hours. The analyst's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling data from multiple systems and correlating it into a comprehensive timeline that revealed the scope of the unauthorized activity. What emerged was a picture of someone conducting the kind of thorough security assessment that would normally require a team of specialists working for several days. "This is sophisticated," the analyst observed, scrolling through screens of data that showed systematic probes of firewall configurations, encryption protocols, access control mechanisms, and network topology. "Whoever did this understands our architecture better than most of our senior staff." Chang studied the data with the kind of focused intensity that had made him one of the most respected security professionals in the Pacific Northwest. "The timing is too precise to be accidental. Look at the intervals between queries, the way they're structured to avoid triggering alerts, the progression from basic system information to increasingly sensitive network segments." He pointed to specific entries in the log files. "This person didn't just stumble into restricted areas. They mapped our defenses methodically, identified weak points, and demonstrated that they could access virtually any system in our infrastructure without authorization." The implications were staggering. Meridian's reputation depended on their ability to protect client data and maintain the integrity of sophisticated security systems.
If someone could penetrate their networks this thoroughly from the inside, it raised questions about their fundamental competence as a cybersecurity firm. The queries are coming from. The analyst paused, double-checking his data before completing the sentence. Workstation 47B. Chang turned toward Sarah's position with the kind of controlled movement that suggested he was processing information that didn't match his expectations. Workstation 47B was occupied by a temporary administrative assistant whose official responsibilities involved nothing more complex than filing vendor contracts and updating procurement databases. Sarah continued typing, her screen displaying the vendor invoice processing system that had occupied her attention throughout the day. But now Chang was approaching her workstation with purpose, carrying a tablet loaded with system logs that told a very different story about her activities. "Miss Chen?" Chang said, his voice carrying the kind of professional courtesy that masked deeper currents of suspicion and growing certainty. "I wonder if I could speak with you for a moment." Sarah looked up from her keyboard with the same politely attentive expression she'd maintained all day. "Of course. Is there a problem with the filing system?" "Not exactly. We've been investigating some unusual network activity, and our logs indicate it's originating from this workstation." "That seems unlikely. I've just been processing vendor documentation." She gestured toward the stack of papers beside her keyboard, which had indeed shrunk considerably since morning. "Nothing that would require accessing network systems." Chang consulted his tablet, reviewing data that painted a very different picture of her computer usage. "According to our logs, this workstation has accessed restricted network segments, performed comprehensive security scans, and queried databases that require administrative privileges. Can you explain that?" The question hung in the air between them, carrying implications that went far beyond simple policy violations. If Sarah was responsible for the unauthorized network access, it suggested capabilities that far exceeded what her employment paperwork indicated. If someone else was using her workstation remotely, it represented a security breach of potentially catastrophic proportions. Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral as she considered her response. Around them, the normal sounds of the IT department continued, keyboard clicking, phone conversations, the hum of cooling fans. But there was a subtle shift in attention as people became aware that something significant was happening at Workstation 47B. "I'm not sure what your logs are showing, but I can guarantee that I haven't intentionally accessed any restricted systems. My access credentials should only allow basic user functions." It was a careful answer that acknowledged the data without admitting responsibility, the kind of response that revealed legal awareness and an understanding of the implications involved in unauthorized network access. Chang studied her expression with the kind of professional assessment that came from years of evaluating security threats and human motivations. "Miss Chen, what exactly is your background? Your employment file indicates administrative experience, but the level of system access we're seeing suggests much more extensive technical knowledge." The question was direct, cutting through the polite formalities that had characterized their conversation up to this point. Chang's tone suggested he'd moved beyond curiosity into the realm of serious security concern, the kind of situation that could result in immediate termination, criminal charges, or worse. Sarah met his gaze with steady composure. "I've worked with various computer systems over the years, nothing that would qualify me for advanced technical positions, but enough to be comfortable with basic network functions." "Basic network functions don't include penetrating military-grade encryption or mapping firewall architectures," Chang replied. "The logs show someone conducting the kind of comprehensive security assessment that would normally require specialized training and high-level clearances." The conversation was attracting attention from other members of the IT department. Marcus Webb had stopped his own work to observe the exchange, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he realized this wasn't a routine administrative discussion. Jessica Martinez was watching from her workstation with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was connecting dots she'd been considering since their lunchtime conversation. Sarah's screen continued to display the vendor invoice processing system, but Chang positioned himself where he could see her monitor clearly. "Would you mind showing me your current browser history, and perhaps demonstrating how you've been accessing the filing systems?" It was a reasonable request that could easily be accommodated if Sarah's computer usage had been limited to legitimate administrative tasks. But it was also a test that would immediately reveal any evidence of the sophisticated network activity that had been puzzling Meridian's security team throughout the day. Sarah's fingers paused above her keyboard for just a fraction of a second, a hesitation so brief it might have been coincidental, which Chang's trained observation interpreted as significant. When she resumed typing, her movements had acquired a different quality, more deliberate, as if she were making decisions about what to reveal and what to conceal. "Of course," she said, pulling up a browser window that showed a history of searches related to vendor information, procurement procedures, and administrative guidelines. "As you can see, I've been focused on understanding the filing requirements and vendor management protocols." Chang reviewed the browser history with professional thoroughness, but it told only part of the story. The sophisticated network access revealed by the system logs would have required different tools, command-line interfaces that operated below the level of standard web browsers. "This shows your web browsing activity, but it doesn't account for the system-level queries our logs have recorded. Those would require terminal access, command-line tools, interfaces that aren't available through standard user accounts." He pulled up his tablet and showed Sarah the log entries that detailed her workstation's network activity. "These queries show someone probing our most sensitive security systems with surgical precision: database extractions, encryption analysis, firewall mapping, activities that would be illegal if performed by someone without proper authorization." The weight of evidence was becoming undeniable, but Sarah maintained her composure with the kind of professional calm that suggested she'd been in similar situations before. Around them, the IT department had grown noticeably quieter as people realized they were witnessing a potential security incident that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. "I understand your concern," Sarah said carefully, "but I can assure you that any system access from this workstation has been unintentional. Perhaps there's been some kind of technical error or account compromise that's creating misleading log entries." It was another deflection that acknowledged the data, but Chang's expression suggested he was running out of patience with evasive answers. The evidence was clear, comprehensive, and pointed directly to sophisticated unauthorized activity originating from Sarah's workstation. "Miss Chen, I'm going to need you to step away from your workstation while we conduct a more thorough investigation. This is a serious security matter that requires immediate attention." The request was phrased politely, but it carried the unmistakable authority of someone who expected compliance without argument. Chang's tone suggested they'd moved beyond preliminary questioning into the realm of formal security procedures, the kind of situation that typically resulted in immediate suspension pending investigation. Sarah looked at her monitor one final time, where the vendor invoice processing system still displayed rows of procurement data that represented her official responsibilities for the day. But buried beneath those mundane spreadsheets, accessible through interfaces that most of Meridian's staff couldn't reach, was evidence of network analysis so comprehensive and sophisticated that it challenged fundamental assumptions about her identity and capabilities. When she finally pushed back from her workstation and stood up, her movement carried a different quality than the careful administrative demeanor she'd maintained throughout the day. There was something in her posture, her expression, the way she carried herself, that suggested the conversation was about to shift in directions that neither Chang nor anyone else in the department had anticipated.
The afternoon light continued to filter through Seattle's clouds, casting long shadows across the IT department, where a temporary administrative assistant was about to reveal that some people weren't quite what their employment paperwork suggested they were. The silence that followed Chang's request stretched longer than anyone in the IT department was comfortable with. Sarah remained standing beside her workstation, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive, as if she were calculating probabilities and considering options that weren't immediately apparent to the observers gathered around them. Chang waited with the kind of professional patience that came from years of security investigations, understanding that pressure and silence often revealed more than direct questioning. His tablet displayed irrefutable evidence of sophisticated network penetration, but his experience had taught him that the most dangerous adversaries were often the ones who appeared most cooperative. "Before I step away from the workstation," Sarah said finally, her voice carrying a different quality than it had during their previous exchanges, "I think there's something you should see." It wasn't the response Chang had expected. Most people caught in unauthorized network access either continued denying responsibility or began making excuses about accidental mistakes. They didn't offer to demonstrate additional evidence of their activities. Sarah returned to her keyboard, but her posture had changed subtly. Where her movements had been careful and administrative throughout the day, now they carried the confidence of someone who no longer needed to conceal their technical capabilities. Her fingers moved across the keys with fluid precision, pulling up interfaces that definitely weren't part of Meridian's standard software suite. Command line windows appeared, displaying cascading text in green fonts against black backgrounds. Network diagnostic tools that most of the IT department had never seen before began running automated scans that painted comprehensive pictures of system architecture, traffic patterns, and security vulnerabilities. "What you're seeing," Sarah said, her voice now carrying unmistakable technical authority, "is a complete penetration test of your network infrastructure. Every system, every protocol, every defensive measure you've implemented over the past 4 years." Chang stared at her monitor with growing comprehension and something that might have been awe. The interfaces displayed on Sarah's screen showed network analysis so detailed and sophisticated that it would have required weeks of work by a team of specialists. Yet she'd accomplished it in a single day while maintaining the appearance of processing mundane vendor paperwork. "The unauthorized access you detected was intentional," Sarah continued, pulling up additional windows that showed firewall configurations, encryption protocols, and access control mechanisms mapped with surgical precision. "It was an assessment." Marcus Webb moved closer, his expression shifting from suspicion to fascination as he recognized tools and techniques that represented the cutting edge of cybersecurity analysis. "Those are military-grade penetration testing applications. How did you get access to classified software?" Sarah's smile carried a quality that suggested the question revealed more about her assumptions than her capabilities. "I didn't get access to classified software, Marcus. I wrote it." The statement landed with unexpected impact, reframing everything they thought they understood about the quiet woman who'd been processing vendor invoices at Workstation 47B. Chang's expression went through rapid changes as he processed the implications of what Sarah was showing them. "You wrote these applications?" Chang's voice carried professional skepticism mixed with growing recognition. "These are enterprise-level security tools. Development would require years of experience, advanced degrees, government clearances." MIT Computer Science, PhD in Cryptographic Systems, 12 years with the NSA's Elite Cyber Operations Division, specialized in penetration testing for critical infrastructure protection. The revelation sent ripples through the gathered IT staff. Jessica Martinez stepped closer, studying the displays with the kind of focused attention that came from recognizing expertise far beyond her own considerable skills. "NSA? You're saying you worked for the National Security Agency?" "Worked" is past tense. I design security protocols for facilities that protect national assets worth trillions of dollars. Your network, impressive as it is, presents certain vulnerabilities that could compromise client data under specific attack scenarios.
Chang was reviewing the evidence on Sarah's screen with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality were undergoing rapid revision. "If you have that kind of background, what are you doing filing paperwork as a temporary administrative assistant?" It was the question that everyone in the department was thinking, but Chang was the only one with sufficient authority to ask directly. Sarah's response carried implications that extended far beyond simple career transitions. Sometimes the best way to understand an organization's real security posture is to observe it from the inside, without the artificial behaviors that people exhibit when they know they're being evaluated by an expert. She pulled up a comprehensive report that detailed every vulnerability, every potential exploit, every weakness in Meridian's defenses that she'd identified during her day of apparent clerical work. The document was professional, thorough, and damning in its assessment of security gaps that could have catastrophic consequences if exploited by malicious actors. Your firewall configurations have 3 critical vulnerabilities that could allow lateral movement through your network, Sarah continued, highlighting specific technical issues with the kind of precision that came from extensive experience in offensive cybersecurity. Your encryption protocols are solid, but your key management procedures create windows of opportunity for sophisticated adversaries. Chang studied the report with growing concern and professional respect. You're saying our security has serious flaws? I'm saying your security is good enough to stop most attacks, but not sophisticated enough to stop the kind of threats that target organizations like Meridian, nation-state actors, advanced persistent threats, the kind of adversaries who have unlimited time and resources to identify weaknesses. The implications were staggering. Meridian's reputation depended on their ability to protect client data from the most sophisticated cyber threats in the world. If their defenses were vulnerable to the kind of advanced attacks that Sarah was describing, it could destroy their business and expose their clients to devastating breaches. Why didn't you just tell us this morning that you were conducting a security assessment? We could have given you proper access credentials, coordinated with our staff, made the process more efficient. Sarah's expression suggested the question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how real security assessments worked. Because that would have given you artificial results. People behave differently when they know they're being evaluated by an expert. Systems get patched hastily, procedures get followed more carefully, vulnerabilities get temporarily concealed. She gestured toward her workstation where command line interfaces continued displaying real-time analysis of network traffic and system performance. What you're seeing now is your organization's actual security posture, not the version you present during scheduled audits and compliance reviews. Marcus Webb was studying the technical displays with fascination and growing unease. So, all day while we thought you were just filing invoices, you were actually conducting the most comprehensive security penetration we've ever experienced? Correct. And documenting every vulnerability, every procedural weakness, every point where your defenses could be compromised by someone with sufficient technical knowledge and malicious intent. Chang's tablet chimed with an incoming message that made his expression shift towards something closer to alarm. We're getting reports of unusual network activity from 3 of our major clients. They're asking if we've been conducting authorized testing of their systems. Sarah nodded with the kind of unsurprised acknowledgement that suggested she'd been expecting this development. Your network segmentation isn't as robust as you believe. When I mapped your internal architecture, the analysis extended into client networks that share certain infrastructure components with your systems.
The scope of what Sarah had accomplished was becoming clear, and it was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. She hadn't just penetrated Meridian's internal systems, she demonstrated that their client networks were also vulnerable to the same sophisticated techniques she'd employed. "This is a disaster," Chang said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that his company's reputation and financial survival were suddenly in jeopardy. "If clients think we can't protect our own networks, they'll terminate contracts and demand damages for any potential data exposure." Sarah's response carried a different tone, more reassuring, suggesting that the situation might not be as catastrophic as it initially appeared. Or, they'll recognize that you've identified critical vulnerabilities before malicious actors could exploit them, and they'll appreciate having access to security expertise that most firms can't provide. She pulled up another interface, this one showing detailed remediation recommendations for each vulnerability she'd identified. "Every weakness I found has solutions. Most can be addressed with configuration changes and procedural improvements. The more complex issues require hardware upgrades and architectural modifications, but nothing that's beyond your technical capabilities."
Chang studied the remediation plan with the kind of focused attention that security professionals brought to crisis management. You're saying you can help us fix these problems? I'm saying I already have solutions designed. The question is whether Meridian wants access to the kind of advanced security expertise that government agencies use to protect critical national infrastructure. The offer carried implications that extended far beyond simple contract arrangements. Sarah was suggesting a collaboration that could transform Meridian from a competent regional security firm into something approaching the elite tier of cybersecurity organizations that protected the most sensitive assets in both government and private sectors. Jessica Martinez had been quietly reviewing the technical details Sarah was displaying, and her expression suggested professional admiration mixed with strategic thinking. "What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah's smile carried the confidence of someone who'd been planning this conversation since she'd first walked into Meridian's offices that morning. "I'm proposing that instead of filing vendor paperwork, you let me show your clients what real security looks like." The afternoon light filtering through Seattle's clouds had taken on the golden quality that marked the transition toward evening. But inside Meridian's IT department, the conversation was just beginning to explore possibilities that could redefine the company's entire approach to cybersecurity and client protection.
Chang's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Meridian's legal department. "They want to know if we need crisis management protocols activated," he announced after a brief conversation. "The partners are asking whether we should notify law enforcement or try to contain this internally." Sarah looked up from her monitors with an expression that suggested she'd been expecting this development. "Before you activate crisis protocols, you might want to see what I actually discovered in those client networks." She pulled up a new interface, this one displaying systematic analysis of security threats that extended far beyond the vulnerabilities she'd identified in Meridian systems. What appeared on her screen was evidence of active malicious activity in multiple client networks, sophisticated attacks that had been operating undetected for weeks or possibly months. Dataflow Industries has been compromised by what appears to be a state-sponsored advanced persistent threat, Sarah announced, highlighting network traffic patterns that revealed unauthorized data exfiltration and persistent backdoor access. Their $12 million security investment failed to detect an ongoing operation that's been extracting proprietary research data for approximately 6 weeks. The revelation shifted the entire context of the afternoon's discoveries. Instead of being the primary security threat, Sarah's unauthorized security assessment hadn't created problems. It had revealed existing problems that posed much more serious threats to Meridian's clients than her penetration testing had. Chang studied the evidence with growing comprehension and professional alarm. "You saying Dataflow has been hacked and their own security team doesn't know it?" "I'm saying Dataflow has been successfully penetrated by adversaries using techniques that their security architecture wasn't designed to detect. The same vulnerabilities that allowed my assessment also enabled much more malicious actors to establish persistent presence in their network." She pulled up additional analysis, showing similar patterns in other client networks. Pacific Maritime Solutions has evidence of cryptocurrency malware running on their distributed processing systems. Emerald City Financial has indicators of compromise, suggesting someone has been monitoring their transaction processing for systematic fraud detection. Each revelation reframed the situation more dramatically. Sarah's unauthorized security assessment hadn't created problems, it had revealed existing problems that posed much more serious threats to Meridian's clients than her penetration testing had. Jessica Martinez moved closer to Sarah's workstation, reviewing the technical evidence with the kind of focused attention that came from recognizing expertise far beyond her own considerable skills. This level of threat analysis would normally require months of work by specialized teams. How did you identify all this in a single day? Because I wrote the algorithms that government agencies use to detect exactly these kinds of sophisticated attacks, Sarah replied, pulling up documentation that showed her development work on advanced threat detection systems. When you understand how nation-state actors operate, identifying their signatures becomes a pattern recognition exercise. Chang's expression was shifting from crisis management to strategic opportunity assessment. So, instead of being liable for unauthorized access, we're potentially the firm that discovered multiple client security breaches that could have caused catastrophic damage if left undetected? Exactly. The question is whether Meridian wants to position itself as a reactive security provider that responds to incidents after they occur, or a proactive organization that identifies threats before they cause irreversible damage. The proposition carried implications that could transform Meridian's entire business model. Instead of selling routine security services to regional clients, they could offer the kind of advanced threat detection capabilities that were typically available only to government agencies and the largest corporations. Sarah's phone chimed with an incoming message that made her expression shift towards something resembling amusement. "Speaking of proactive threat detection, I just received a very interesting message." She turned her monitors so Chang could see the encrypted message that had appeared in a secure communication application he didn't recognize. The sender's credentials indicated origin from a government intelligence agency, and the message content suggested they'd been monitoring the afternoon's activities with considerable interest. The NSA's Cyber Threat Intelligence Division wants to schedule a conference call. Apparently, they've been tracking the same advanced persistent threats I identified in your client networks, and they're interested in coordinating a joint response operation. The implications were staggering.
What had started as a routine day of administrative paperwork was evolving into a potential collaboration between Meridian, government intelligence agencies, and compromised organizations that needed immediate threat remediation services. Chang studied the government message with the expression of someone processing opportunities that exceeded his most optimistic projections for company growth. They want to work with us on threat response? They want to work with me on threat response, using Meridian as the private sector coordination point for a comprehensive operation that could neutralize several ongoing attacks simultaneously.
Sarah pulled up additional interfaces showing the scope of what such a collaboration might involve. The threats I identified today are part of a larger campaign targeting critical infrastructure across multiple sectors: financial services, maritime shipping, technology research, defense contractors. This isn't random opportunistic hacking, it's coordinated strategic intelligence gathering. Marcus Webb was reviewing the technical evidence with growing excitement and professional recognition. This is the kind of operation that makes careers. If we help coordinate a successful response to nation-state level cyber attacks, Meridian becomes the private sector firm that government agencies call when they need sophisticated cyber threat analysis, Sarah finished. That's a very different market position than processing routine security audits for regional businesses. Chang's phone buzzed with another client call, but this time his expression suggested he was viewing the communication as an opportunity rather than a crisis. Pacific Maritime is asking for an emergency consultation about potential network compromises. They want our best people on site immediately. Your best people just spent the day filing vendor paperwork, Sarah observed with dry humor. But if you're interested in demonstrating what advanced threat detection actually looks like, I can show them capabilities they didn't know existed. The afternoon had taken on surreal quality as routine administrative work transformed into a potential partnership with government intelligence agencies for coordinated response to sophisticated cyber attacks. Chang was processing strategic implications that could redefine his company's entire trajectory. "What exactly are you proposing?" Chang asked, his tone suggesting he was ready to consider possibilities that would have seemed impossible that morning. Sarah's response carried the confidence of someone who'd been planning this conversation long before she'd walked into Meridian's offices. "I'm proposing that instead of hiring me as a temporary administrative assistant, you bring me on as Senior Director of Advanced Threat Analysis, with authority to coordinate directly with government agencies on critical infrastructure protection." The position she was describing didn't exist in Meridian's organizational structure, but the events of the afternoon had demonstrated that their traditional structure might not be adequate for the opportunities that were emerging. And in return? In return, your clients get access to threat detection capabilities that are normally classified. Your company becomes a preferred partner for government cyber operations, and you establish a market position as the firm that identifies sophisticated attacks before they cause irreversible damage. Chang looked around the IT department where his staff had gathered to witness a conversation that was redefining their understanding of what cybersecurity expertise could accomplish. The evidence displayed on Sarah's monitors showed analysis so comprehensive and sophisticated that it challenged their fundamental assumptions about what was possible in the private sector. "When can you start?" Chang asked, his tone suggesting he was ready to consider possibilities that would have seemed impossible that morning. Sarah's response carried the confidence of someone who'd been planning this conversation long before she'd walked into Meridian's offices. "I'm proposing that instead of hiring me as a temporary administrative assistant, you bring me on as Senior Director of Advanced Threat Analysis, with authority to coordinate directly with government agencies on critical infrastructure protection." The position she was describing didn't exist in Meridian's organizational structure, but the events of the afternoon had demonstrated that their traditional structure might not be adequate for the opportunities that were emerging. And in return? In return, your clients get access to threat detection capabilities that are normally classified. Your company becomes a preferred partner for government cyber operations, and you establish a market position as the firm that identifies sophisticated attacks before they cause irreversible damage. Chang looked around the IT department where his staff had gathered to witness a conversation that was redefining their understanding of what cybersecurity expertise could accomplish. The evidence displayed on Sarah's monitors showed analysis so comprehensive and sophisticated that it challenged their fundamental assumptions about what was possible in the private sector. "When can you start?" Chang asked, his tone suggesting he was ready to consider possibilities that would have seemed impossible that morning. Sarah's response carried the confidence of someone who'd been planning this conversation long before she'd walked into Meridian's offices. "I'm proposing that instead of hiring me as a temporary administrative assistant, you bring me on as Senior Director of Advanced Threat Analysis, with authority to coordinate directly with government agencies on critical infrastructure protection." The executive conference room on Meridian's third floor had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate what was rapidly becoming the most significant security briefing in the company's history. Multiple screens displayed real-time threat analysis data, while secure communication links connected the room to government facilities in Washington, D.C., client locations across the Pacific Northwest, and law enforcement agencies coordinating response to what intelligence analysts were now classifying as a coordinated nation-state cyber campaign. Sarah stood before a wall of monitors, her appearance transformed from the morning's administrative assistant persona into something closer to a military briefing officer. The vendor paperwork that had occupied her day now seemed like theatrical props in comparison to the comprehensive threat intelligence she was presenting to an audience of senior executives, government officials, and client representatives who were still processing the scope of what she'd discovered. "The attack campaign we've identified operates under the codename Silent Harbor," Sarah announced, using a laser pointer to highlight network topology maps that showed the interconnectedness of the threats across multiple organizations. "Intelligence indicates a coordinated operation targeting critical infrastructure with the objective of establishing persistent access for long-term intelligence gathering and potential disruption capabilities." She gestured to specific sections of the network maps. "Once inside the perimeter, they deploy persistent backdoors that masquerade as routine system processes. Detection requires analysis techniques that most commercial security tools aren't designed to perform." The implications were sobering. The threat actors weren't opportunistic hackers looking for quick profits. They were sophisticated adversaries with resources, patience, and strategic objectives that extended far beyond individual corporate targets. Dataflow Industries lost approximately 47 gigabytes of proprietary research data before we identified the breach, Sarah continued, displaying forensic analysis that showed exactly what information had been exfiltrated and when. Pacific Maritime had their shipping coordination protocols compromised, potentially allowing adversaries to track sensitive cargo movements for military and economic intelligence. The secure communication link crackled with an incoming transmission from the NSA's Cyber Threat Intelligence Division. Agent Rebecca Torres appeared on the main screen, her expression carrying the focused intensity that came from coordinating rapid response to national security threats. "Dr. Chen, we've confirmed your analysis of the Silent Harbor campaign through independent intelligence sources," Torres announced. "The threat actors are associated with a nation-state adversary that's been conducting systematic reconnaissance of American critical infrastructure for approximately 18 months. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What Sarah had discovered during her day of apparent administrative work was evidence of a long-term strategic intelligence operation that posed threats to national security as well as corporate interests. Chang leaned forward in his chair. "Agent Torres,
What kind of coordination are you looking for from the private sector? We need immediate containment of the identified breaches, forensic analysis to determine the full scope of data compromise, and coordinated remediation that prevents the threat actors from recognizing that their operations have been discovered. It was a complex requirement that demanded simultaneous technical expertise, strategic coordination, and operational security, the kind of challenge that most private cybersecurity firms would struggle to handle even with extensive preparation and government support. Sarah stepped forward. We can coordinate remediation across all affected networks within 72 hours, while maintaining operational security that prevents threat actor awareness. However, it will require unprecedented collaboration between government agencies, private sector partners, and affected organizations. Torres nodded with professional recognition. Dr. Chen, the intelligence community is prepared to provide classified threat signatures, attribution analysis, and real-time coordination support. This represents a new model for public-private cybersecurity cooperation. The conversation was establishing frameworks for collaboration that could redefine how America responded to sophisticated cyber threats. Instead of government agencies and private companies operating in isolation, they were developing integrated response capabilities that combined intelligence resources with commercial technical expertise. Victoria Hawthorne consulted with her partners before addressing the broader implications for Meridian's business. If we coordinate this operation successfully, what does it mean for our company's long-term strategic position? Sarah's response carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. It means Meridian becomes a preferred partner for government cybersecurity operations, with access to classified threat intelligence and advanced technical resources that aren't available to commercial firms. She pulled up organizational charts that showed how such partnerships typically functioned. Government agencies need private sector partners who can operate in commercial environments with speed and flexibility that official channels can't match. Meridian could become the coordination point for a new model of integrated cyber defense. The opportunity was staggering, but it also carried risks and responsibilities that went beyond traditional commercial cybersecurity work. Success could establish Meridian as one of the elite firms that worked directly with intelligence agencies on national security issues. Failure could result in compromised client relationships and potential legal liability for mishandling classified information. Marcus Webb had been reviewing the technical requirements for the coordinated response operation. Dr. Chen, the remediation timeline you're proposing would normally require weeks of preparation. How do we accomplish this in 72 hours? Because I've already designed the remediation protocols during today's analysis, Sarah replied, pulling up comprehensive response plans that detailed exactly how each identified vulnerability would be addressed. Every breach I discover includes specific technical solutions that can be implemented immediately. The screens displayed step-by-step procedures for removing persistent backdoors, closing security gaps, and implementing monitoring systems that would detect future intrusion attempts. The level of details suggested that Sarah had been preparing for this coordinated response operation long before anyone else understood the scope of the threats involved. Jessica Martinez studied the remediation plans with professional admiration. This is incredibly sophisticated. Most consulting firms would need teams of specialists working all the clock to develop response protocols this comprehensive.
Most consulting firms don't have direct experience with the attack methods that nation-state adversaries actually use, Sarah observed. When you understand how these operations work from the inside, designing countermeasures becomes an engineering problem rather than a research project. Agent Torres's communication link activated again. Dr. Chen, we're ready to provide classified threat signatures and attribution data that will support the remediation operation. Can Meridian handle compartmented information with appropriate security protocols? It was a question that went to the heart of whether a regional cybersecurity firm could evolve into the kind of organization that worked directly with intelligence agencies on classified operations. Chang looked around the conference room at partners and staff who were processing opportunities they hadn't imagined that morning.
"We can establish appropriate security protocols immediately," Chang replied. "What clearance requirements are we looking at?" Dr. Chen already holds the necessary clearances from her previous government service. Additional staff will need interim clearances that can be expedited given the operational urgency. This isn't unusual for private sector partners supporting critical national security operations. The conversation was moving at a pace that reflected the urgency of coordinated threat response, but also the recognition that they were establishing precedents for future public-private cybersecurity cooperation. Sarah had positioned Meridian at the center of operations that could define how America defended against sophisticated cyber attacks. Victoria Hawthorne made the strategic decision that would determine her company's trajectory. Agent Torres, Dr. Chen, we're prepared to coordinate this operation with full government partnership. What do we need to implement immediately? Sarah's response came with the confidence of someone who'd been planning this moment since she'd first accessed Meridian's network that morning. "We need secure facilities for classified briefings, direct communication links to affected client locations, and authority to implement emergency security protocols across multiple organizations simultaneously." She gestured toward the monitors displaying real-time threat analysis. "Most importantly, we need everyone in this room to understand that we're no longer responding to isolated security incidents. We're coordinating strategic defense operations that will determine how effectively America can protect its critical infrastructure from nation-state adversaries." The afternoon light filtering through the conference room windows had taken on the deeper tones that marked the approach of evening, but inside Meridian's offices, the real work was just beginning. What had started as routine administrative filing was evolving into a coordinated national security operation that would test everyone's capabilities and redefine their understanding of what cybersecurity expertise could accomplish when properly applied. 3 days later, the same IT department that had watched Sarah Chen process vendor invoices with bemused condescension was now serving as the command center for the most successful coordinated cyber defense operation in recent government history. The transformation was so complete that visitors might not have recognized the space, with its secure communication terminals, classified briefing stations, and real-time threat monitoring displays that showed the systematic neutralization of Silent Harbor's extensive network infiltration. Sarah moved between workstations with the quiet authority of someone coordinating operations that spanned multiple time zones, government agencies, and corporate networks. Where she had once sat hunched over administrative paperwork, now she directed a team of specialists implementing remediation protocols that were simultaneously protecting American critical infrastructure and gathering intelligence on nation-state cyber capabilities. The success metrics spoke for themselves. 47 separate network intrusions had been identified and neutralized without alerting the threat actors to the scope of the counter-operations. Terabytes of stolen data had been quarantined and analyzed, revealing intelligence patterns that would reshape government understanding of adversary capabilities for years to come. Most remarkably, the entire operation had been coordinated from a regional cybersecurity firm that had been processing routine security audits just 72 hours earlier. Agent Rebecca Torres materialized on the main communication screen for the final operational briefing, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just witnessed a textbook example of how public-private cybersecurity cooperation could function when properly executed. Dr. Chen, the intelligence community's preliminary assessment indicates that Operation Silent Harbor has been completely neutralized. More importantly, the threat actors remain unaware that their network access has been compromised, which allows continued monitoring of their methods and objectives.
The strategic implications extended far beyond immediate threat mitigation. By maintaining the appearance that the intrusions remained undetected, government agencies could continue gathering intelligence on nation-state cyber operations while the threat actors unknowingly revealed additional information about their capabilities, targets, and strategic objectives. Chang stood beside Sarah at the primary coordination station, still processing the magnitude of what his company had accomplished. Agent Torres, what does this mean for ongoing cooperation between Meridian and government cybersecurity operations? It means Meridian has demonstrated capabilities that qualify you for inclusion in the most sensitive cyber defense initiatives, Torres replied. We're prepared to establish formal partnership agreements that would provide access to classified threat intelligence and coordination authority for future operations. The opportunity represented a complete transformation of Meridian's business model. Instead of competing for routine commercial security contracts, they would become one of the elite firms that worked directly with intelligence agencies on operations that protected national security interests. Victoria Hawthorne, who had spent the past 3 days observing a level of cybersecurity expertise she hadn't known existed in the private sector, addressed the broader implications for the company's strategic direction. Dr. Chen, I think it's fair to say that your temporary administrative position has evolved somewhat beyond our initial job description. Sarah's smile carried the quiet satisfaction of someone whose careful planning had achieved exactly the results she'd intended. I'd never expected to spend my career filing vendor paperwork, but I did want to understand how private sector cybersecurity firms actually functioned before proposing ways to improve their capabilities. The admission revealed that Sarah's appearance at Meridian hadn't been the result of routine job placement, but rather a deliberate assessment of whether the company possessed the foundation necessary to support the kind of advanced operations that government agencies needed from private sector partners. Marcus Webb, who had evolved from skeptical observer to enthusiastic supporter over the course of the operation, reviewed the technical achievements with professional admiration. Dr. Chen, the threat detection algorithms you implemented are identifying attack patterns that our previous systems never would have recognized. How do we maintain these capabilities going forward? By understanding that cybersecurity isn't just about implementing technology solutions, Sarah replied, pulling up organizational charts that showed how the operation had required coordination between technical specialists, strategic planners, government liaisons, and client relationship managers. What you've learned over the past 3 days is how to function as part of a larger national security ecosystem rather than an isolated commercial entity. The educational aspect of the operation had been as important as the immediate threat mitigation. Meridian staff had gained experience with classified information handling, government coordination protocols, and advanced threat analysis techniques that would qualify them for future operations at the highest levels of national cybersecurity. Jessica Martinez had been reviewing post-operation analysis reports that documented lessons learned and procedural improvements for future coordinated responses. The clients we've worked with during this operation are asking about expanding our security services beyond basic monitoring and incident response. They want access to the kind of proactive threat detection we demonstrated.
It was a natural development. Organizations that had experienced Sarah's comprehensive security assessment understood that routine cybersecurity measures weren't adequate protection against the sophisticated threats that nation-state adversaries could deploy.
As the afternoon light filtered through Seattle's eternal cloud cover, the IT department that had once processed routine security audits was already preparing for the next phase of operations that would help define how America defended its most critical digital infrastructure against sophisticated adversaries. The stack of vendor paperwork that had occupied Sarah's first day remained on her desk, now serving as a reminder that the most dangerous threats often came from the least expected sources. But more importantly, it represented proof that the most effective defenders were sometimes the quiet professionals who understood that genuine security required capabilities that went far beyond what appeared on official job descriptions. In the end, they had made her file paperwork until she demonstrated that some filing clerks possessed the expertise to neutralize nation-state cyber campaigns. It was a lesson that would reshape how everyone in the department evaluated quiet competence, hidden expertise, and the strategic value of people who preferred to demonstrate their capabilities through results rather than credentials. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen.
If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.